Thank you very much, Greg. And Simon and I discussed a lot, so I will guide you through in 8 minutes or 10 minutes through some of the aspects that I believe are important. And the first one is obviously my disclosure. And then I would like to start with the future, because the reality is cruel. Transcatheter mitral valve replacement will be a key therapy for mitral regurgitation patients with evidence to prove safety and efficacy. TMVR valve design will address current limitations and, along with other procedural improvements such as imaging and transseptal transfemoral access, will help make the procedure easier. Obviously, in order to really gain traction on this therapy, we have some procedural goals. Safety, efficacy, ease of use by reduction or even better elimination of mitral regurgitation. Obviously, no PVL. And then the problem of access, transseptal versus transfemoral, or transseptal, transfemoral, and minimal anatomical exclusions, which is a major issue still today, and of course a very predictable deployment. And this is the reality, which is somewhat cruel. We started 2012, now we have 2019, and you look at them, and some of them passed away, mainly the cardiac Q iterations, and recently the Caisson has been buried. So basically, it was a long journey, and it continues to be a long journey. Basically, we have transapical, transseptal devices. Saiba talked about the Abbott Tendyne, the Medtronic Intrepid, and the VUS Tiara, which are transapical. And then we have the transseptal devices, the Valtech, Caisson, as I said, is pronounced dead, High Life, Edwards Evoque, M3 Sapien, and Sophia. And this is, from 2012 until today, what we have achieved. And don't even try to compare it to TAVR. Basically, it is the two leading are Tendyne, Intrepid, followed by Tiara, and then we have a few transeptals. Basically, we have 680 patients altogether in those years. And therefore, I think it is important, if we look at the device parade now, we look at the replacement technologies, and I would like to start with the transapicals very briefly, Tendyne, Intrepid, and Tiara. And this is actually our procedural goal. This is what we would like to achieve with any technology, at least in my view, if the ventricle is not too far off, that we really reduce mitral regurgitation. And if these devices are being implanted successfully, we can achieve this goal as shown here at the Intrepid, Tendyne, and Tiara bars. You can see this is actually what we need to achieve. Difficult. And even though Saiba talked about David Adams, comparing the Summit arms between Apollo, it's a little bit more to that than David Adams, I believe, but obviously this is critical while we are here in New York. Then we look to transseptal, which is basically Valtech, Advocent 3, High Life, Evoque, and Sophia. This is the death sentence basically of Caisson on November 20th. LivaNova announced it is ending its Caisson TMVR program. Going on to Evoque, which is the latest iteration of cardiac Q, the early feasibility study is currently enrolling, and it is fixed, as Saiba said, by anchors to the annulus, leaflets, and the chordae. And we have to be very careful with the devices, including the chordae, because at some point they might rupture, and that is not something that we would like to see. Compassionate use and early feasibility study of the Evoque is shown here. On the right side, everything that's green or light green is of something that's good, and on the red side, on the left side, red is really severe MR. And we can see once Evoque is being deployed successfully, there's a marked reduction of mitral regurgitation, and the 30-day clinical outcomes is really very good in these early studies. Sapien M3. There's a valve, the Sapien tissue and the frame, and then we have the dock, the stent, and then the assembled vase down there. US-Canada EFS study is currently enrolling. This is what the device looks like in its position. And you can see the technical success at the procedure completion is also very high, 88.9%, 40 out of 45 patients, and then most importantly, obviously, all patients are alive. Again, looking at the bars with reduction of MR at 30 days, quite promising if this device is being deployed successfully. Another one came back up again after device iteration and restructuring the company, High Life, which is basically the valve and a ring, and this is being fixed supraannularly in the mitral space, and there is a combined transeptal transaortic approach, but basically we consider transeptal because the ring that's being deployed is really via the aortic approach. And this is a case, and you can see at least the potential advantage due to the low footprint, the LVOT obstruction seems to be in favor of, there's less LVOT obstruction due to this low profile, and we'll see how the valve will come along. And you can see here the global feasibility studies in various geographies of the world. For the time being, numbers are still very low. And then I would like to actually switch gear a little bit to novel TMVR technologies with a view of the future, because we have to see 2012, we started, now we have 2019, some are being dead, some are alive, 600 patients. So maybe we should broaden a little bit our way of how to do things. And I would like to give you two examples, the Saturn Technology. The Saturn TMVR is a single device characterized by an annular structure and mechanically connected to the central valve. On the left, you see the annular structure, and in the middle, you can see the valve, and this is assembled, having the advantage, actually, that you can reduce the size by this ring or by this cling, that you can reduce the mitral annulus and thus stabilize the valve and the annulus. Quite an interesting solution, and you can see here what you can do with this device. Once you apply this annulus ring, then you can reduce the annulus size, and you can do maybe both in one step, reducing the annulus or stabilize the annulus and get rid of the mitral regurgitation. Quite interesting. Also, the Saturn is designed to reduce the risk of SAM because the anterior leaflet is secured by the connecting arm, which kind of secures the anterior leaflet, so SAM is going to be excluded. And also, they are on their way for a transeptal TMVR once the company moves further along. And then we have the spaceship. The Alta valve features, it's an interesting design. Basically, what you can see here, very, very large cells. It's within the left atrial. This device has a transeptal and transapical delivery. Basically, Dr. Wolskabo and Philip General are doing this study here. You can see the first patient has been done September 5th in 2018, transapically with 1-year follow-up and no regurgitation. Quite interesting on the left side. You see this cage filling out the left atrium. And then Philip did the first transeptal in September of this year with apparently a good acute result. Don't forget, this is the atrium, this is not the ventricle, so it kind of sticks out in the ventricle and fills out the whole the atrial space. Quite an interesting device. And then the next steps, EFS, US and Japan. Don't know exactly why they go to Japan, but this is how it is. 15 to 30 patients, TA or TF, high-risk patients for surgical MVR as determined by the heart team, and anticipated fast enrollment since Alta valve is suitable for most anatomies. And finally, I would like to point out two technologies which I think are very, very interesting. And actually, I would like to kind of stir up a little bit the conventional thinking and a bridge between replacement and repair. And this is the SUTRA TMVR solution. I'm sure you've heard about that. If we look at the mitral valve, you can see the native anterior leaflet and the posterior leaflet. And what SUTRA does is a tri-leaflet posterior design. It's kind of not only augmentation of the coaptation surface, but also kind of creating a leaflet design. And this would be the optimal coaptation. Once you have a gap between the two, SUTRA can fill this space. And if we look at the device, you can see here, it does have a crescent-shaped stent frame. does have a tri-leaflet valve design and an angular anchoring, either by clipping it or by screws. And here you can see the 4DCT in an animal, and you can see very nice P2 coapting with the anterior mitral leaflet quite successfully and quite nicely. We'll see how this comes along, and you can see here the device in place. And look at here the half-moon shape or the crescent-shaped device, fairly stable in its movement along the cycle. So the solution replaces only the native posterior leaflet, preserves the normal motion of the native anterior leaflet. Half frame requires little space in the left ventricle and therefore try to eliminate left ventricular outflow obstruction. Anchors at the mitral annulus, anchors deployed in the beating heart, and a very small crimp profile for delivery. And last but not least, something that has created traction now, the Polaris approach, which is the posterior leaflet augmentation and restoration. The Polaris system, here you can see the implant, then its delivery, the delivery catheter, and the anchoring system with a central screw and 2 side screws. So altogether, 5 screws. This is the implant in an animal. You can see here it's a very symmetrical application. And as of November 22nd, there's a first human patient being done in Hamburg by Dr. Schäfer and his team. And you can see here basically the device with the 5 anchors, Dr. Schäfer with the patient. We were allowed to show this picture also with the face. And then you can see here, eliminating this patient did have grade 4 mitral insufficiency. And you can see here the device successfully deployed and eliminating mitral regurgitation with a little bit of P3 MR. So finally, this is the last slide. The last slide. Reality is cruel, as we know, a long journey, and we're not done yet, by all means. But I still think the future is promising, and this is really my last one. There has been progress with EFS with multiple technologies. Several EFS have already transitioned to pivotal trials. Progress made at transseptal TMVR, but remains at the early stage than transapical. Despite early experience, some studies have observed mortality lower than predicted by the STS score. Early experience in MAC seems promising, and the MAC arm has been added in pivotal trials in Summit and in Apollo, and Seibert pointed that out. Risk of LVOT remains a concern for some technologies, obviously, and new innovative solutions are underway, and early results seem to be promising. And despite all challenges, the field of TMVR is moving, but a lot slower than expected, and it is certainly not comparable to TAVR. Thank you very much, Greg, and thank you very much for your attention.